Right, hopefully we should be back. If the audio is playing up for anybody, I can only apologise. Technical things go way over my head. I'm just here to talk about paint. So hopefully we have people. Hopefully we have people in the audience, and welcome to today's class on freehand. Well, hopefully followed by a session on non-metallic metals as well. Hopefully everybody's doing all right. I can't see the chat, I've just realised. But hopefully you have all come with a vested interest in wanting to know how to perhaps add a little bit of extra polish to your miniatures, or maybe just adding some sort of, I don't know, maybe a design upon a banner, or maybe some flourishes onto, say, some new Bretonians that may have just been released for a certain game by Games Workshop, you never know. Or indeed if we get any people that are just getting into or starting to have a play around with display level painting, or wanting to just take things perhaps a little bit further, this may perhaps be a way to start all of that off. Or indeed, if you are just not a miniature painter and you want to maybe do some just standard art on paper, woodcuts, anything like this, this may give you some place to start as well. So, really, I think the first thing to do is to show off, so that I'm not just a disembodied voice. Hopefully my camera hasn't frozen already, but when you're doing some form of freehand, the first thing that you need to do is sort of think about what it is that you would like to do. And for a lot of these ideas, the easiest one that you can do in any form of miniature is to try to paint, say, I don't know, a cape on the back of something. Now, these are very useful in so much as generally you will be the only one to see them. If it's a display piece, they will normally be turned around to the front. Little sneak preview for later on, by the way. But if you are doing this for a tabletop miniature, then traditionally, if you're playing them for a game, the miniatures will be on the table like that, only you'll really be able to see them. So you can take some relief that chances are, even if you're not entirely perfect, it'll be alright. And plus, as Dave and I'm sure many other people have said in previous classes, it's only paint. You can paint over it. But capes, very useful place to start. So if you've never tried freehand before, I do advise you do start with some form of cape or anything like that. Now, for all of this, for this model that I conveniently prepared earlier, I started off wondering as to what I may or may not actually add to it, and generally for freehand it is best to have an idea as to where you want to go. Now, as I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate 3 recently, and of course the colour purple immediately brings across any images of Shah, and indeed a little bit into Act 2, I shan't spoil things for people, but generally the image of all of that is kind of lurking around in my head at the moment, so I thought, well, let's have something to do with, say, we can get something to do with like darkness, or maybe some sort of symbology to do with it, and of course after having looked up various images of various symbols that do appear within the game, I then decided, well, let's go for perhaps more a contrasting effect of it, and I decided, well, let's go for, say, a moon, for instance. Now, of course, a moon can be quite interesting, but indeed it needs something else to add to it, and from there we can start designing some things. Now, the other thing that you'll need when you do any form of freehand is that you'll probably need a sketchbook. Now, here is mine, and this has been used very frequently, as you can see by the number of blank pages that are appearing, and indeed these are just places where you can just doodle idly onto all of these. Now for this I decided, well, we need something just to kind of show off what can be done with the cape, and it is a fairly large surface area to cover. So we decided, well, I could do sort of like we have the moon design, but then of course intersecting it with a blade adds a little bit more sort of interest to it, can add a few different elements to it, and actually, rather than using my fingers, I'll use the end of a brush, and we can get some nice sort of interlocking design patterns onto it, just to add a bit more visual interest. We can also consider that by having some sort of blade or anything like that, we can add some light reflections or anything similar. But from there I then thought, well, perhaps it's a little bit too complicated to really do in the time that I've got left, so perhaps I should go on to something else. So then decided, well, there may be a sort of floral design, possibly ending with an almost a fleur-de-lis, if indeed you are painting any Bretonians or doing some Sisters of Battle, for instance, or anything like that might be a good thing to do. But then following on from there, I thought, well, I don't really want it to just end in a bulb, and of course, lowering it down, it just turns into the symbol of Tzeentch, which doesn't really work with the purple. And then I returned to the other image again of thinking, well, still if we have this bisecting blade going through the middle of a moon, we get a nice sort of like circular image into the middle, followed by a pointed image from there. And it kind of works with the whole theme that we were going for. Now for all of these are just sort of very simple doodles that I just put together about sort of an hour before I started planning painting it. And admittedly, I did do these last night when I was preparing, because of course if you're doing a live class to a live audience, you prepare it the night before. Very professional, as I'm sure you agree. But then we can, of course, consider, well, maybe we should link to some other elements that we're going for. And then thought, well, this is for SquidCon, and it is one of the last-ish classes. There are a couple more, and there is one more after me, but I thought, well, let's do something to commemorate it. And, of course, lettering, very fun to do. So for all of these things, you can consider what script do you want them to be in. Do you want an overly sort of lavishly designed script, or do you just want to go for simple handwriting? Now, given again the size of the miniature, if you're going for something very, very large, or you're going for like a large banner, or you only want to have one main figure into the area, having a large ornate script may work better. But in this case, having something a little bit smaller and simpler would work. Now we'll get to sort of like the specifics of doing a script a little bit later, hopefully with a live demonstration, provided everything goes to plan. But then of course you can get into some more ornate things. I'd consider maybe having some sort of large tentacle, as you can see the ones currently around the frame of it, just down there, and then doing something to commemorate the event just there, but again, perhaps a little bit too much to do in the 45 minutes. So I ended up thinking, well, let's stick to this, and then maybe perhaps some scroll work as from there, and some lettering, and maybe a little bit more ornamentation, such as all of these. So basically, by having a nice doodle page, you can combine all of your ideas. The other thing to do, of course, and this is very useful just in the scheme of muscle memory and how you want to approach some of your freehand, if you do draw things out, if I can just find a pencil on my desk, if you draw anything out, then you will of course be able to learn the way that you move your hand, the positioning that you hold your pen or indeed your brush in. You can start to move and consider the way that you are doing it, and then of course, and you start to do that with a brush, it seems a little bit easier, and immediately you can sort of have all of that pre-programmed into your hand as you're trying to paint, which does make things rather easier. So, first thing you need to do, if you take anything away from this, is do remember to have a sketchbook, and if you don't want anybody to ever see your attempt at starting to do things, you never have to let them see it. I'm just letting you see mine, because otherwise it's a fairly boring class just looking at my desk. Now, as I said, I did do a little bit of preparation for earlier, so here in the pure Blue Peter fashion, here's one that I prepared earlier. Now, as you can see, having a nice, solid central image upon the back of the miniature does help in order to tie it all together. And I'll just use a brush again so I don't scratch any paint off. Now, having a large central figure does draw the eye towards there. It also is a nice contrasting colour between the backdrop and there, so immediately you can start thinking about which paints you'd like to use. And of course having some metallic sections into the middle does allow a little bit more visual interest into it, and then having some scroll work, which is simpler than you may think, and then adding in the writing, which isn't as simple as you might think, but hopefully we'll get some time to go over it a bit later. The other thing that you can also start to think about is maybe do you want some alternate metallics, just to add some more contrasting colours, getting a bit of extra detail, maybe some alternate and indeed artificial lighting over it, and indeed then it just really wherever you want to take your imagination, or indeed how complex you want to make it. Or indeed, if you want to spend a lot of time onto it, then you can go even more ornate, or if you don't want to spend any time at all, you don't have to. But then, of course, you may not want to have larger pictorial designs, or indeed anything that could be considered sort of anything that would draw away from any of the other aspects of the model. So you can go for something, if I can get camera to zoom in and stay in focus, there we go. We could of course go for something that's perhaps a little bit more like ornamentation and flourishes that may be inlaid into, say, metallic sections, or indeed embroidered into fabric, as indeed we have in this section. Now, smaller symbolic designs are much easier to come across and can be done with the same level as sort of like detail as indeed you have in your pectoral sections, but just allow as something that doesn't distract quite as much. Now, from all of there, you can put this really wherever you want. In this case, I've just followed the shape of the model, but on your model, you may have something different, so you can paint it however you wish. Now, we probably will go over this sort of thing, and indeed the construction and painting of them as we go across, just because it's easier. I'm sure that my two assistants that are currently in Discord can tell me whether people in the chat want to see something a bit more ornate, or whether you prefer to see the designs, which, of course, they will probably tell me in a few seconds because there is a delay. The other thing that you can also start to think about, and this is mainly for your 32mm models or your smaller ones if you want to really push them a little bit further, is to consider micro details, and this is really micro freehanding. And this is something that if you want an expert in these sort of matters, I do recommend looking at the work of Richard Gray, which if you haven't heard of him, do look it up and then spend a couple of hours on his Instagram page, I know I do, and just look at how he constructs all of his smaller details that don't distract from the miniature, but still allow for there to be enough extra detail onto it. Now if we zoom out a little bit just so you can see it a bit more frame, in these sort of things this is just merely a small repeating pattern that could go right the way across the hem of the cape, and indeed that you can just paint it right the way across, maybe add in a little bit more ornamentation if you wish. But indeed, all of that is down to you. It is your model, you can paint it however you wish. I can just show you the process of it, and then hopefully you will all have a go. And if you do have a go, remember to tag me, and I will come and see all of your works and probably like it if you want ornate, right? Well, that's changed my plans somewhat, but still, I shall do as you ask. So, if we begin with our other model that we've primed and prepared earlier, we start with just by laying out, as we do for most painting, just by getting a base coat down. Now, if we will do a moon again, I think, just because, again, Saloon versus Shah is a very nice thing to bring into most ideas of fantasy. Now, for a base, you need something that could either be a shadow colour or indeed something that you can build off. In this case, I'm using bright warm grey from Monument Hobbies. Indeed, it could be anything, but this is just simply what I've got on my desk, and indeed it will be used in the next class, so helps to have it already on my palette. Now, I will be starting with this, because I know that there is the myth that if you're going to do any form of freehand, you need the smallest brush possible, probably one with only 1 or 2 hairs left, and you hold it basically tiny, tiny thing you do with teeny, tiny brushes. I shan't be doing that. I'll be using a size 1 from Winsor & Newton, which may seem foolish, and if it is, well, you can all laugh at me in the chat once it goes wrong. So we'll start up by just loading the brush up with not too much paint. We don't want to really go too much. Let's see if we can get that to focus. There we go. You don't want too much, just a little bit into the tip of the brush. And indeed, I think if we're going to go for a moon again, we'll start on this area here where all of the folds are, just to get some nice sort of like extra complications to it, because why make my life easy for you all? So we just begin by doing basic sort of shapes going around into this. Now, it's very useful just to have not too much paint onto the tip of your brush, because otherwise, if you see, when I do press it against there, you may get some of the water coming out of it, and then if you've got paint already up there, you'll get paint in where you don't necessarily want it to be. Also, apologies if I do keep moving it off camera. My palette is over this direction, and being right-handed, I do have to reach across. So, we just begin by just sketching out a design. And indeed, don't try to do it all in one go. You can, to use I believe the artistic term is feather it, where you do lots of small lines to bring it all up. Also, you will probably notice that my hands are shaking. It's a very cold day here in the UK. It's not because I'm nervous, definitely not. And once you've got a sort of basic sort of outline kind of done, you can see, does it look all right? Is it nice and central? Does it follow all of your lines through? Apologies for going off frame there, but you can just see that it does follow kind of all the way through. And then we'll go for a slightly more sort of, I don't know, Tim Burton kind of crooked style moon for this one. Why not? So just load up my brush again. And then I think we don't do just for, again, doing similarly on the inside, and then I think that kind of works for that. It looks kind of what I wonder. We do have a tiny bit of a mistake there. You can see that I've just gone over there, but we'll correct them later, because again, this is very much like drawing stuff normally. You can correct it as many times as you like. And then once we've just got the basic thing marked out, you can start filling it in. Now, you can use a slightly thinner paint for all of this, or if you want to, you can use a thicker paint and then use your brush strokes to your advantage. Now, I'll be using probably a slightly thinner paint just so I don't have to load up my brush as much, but there is a way that if you use slightly thicker paint, the way that you build up all of your brush strokes, you can build a texture to it. Now with that, this is just, as your brush splays out, all of the individual bristles will start to spread out, and you'll get a little bit of sort of inlaid texture into the paint job. Now from there, you can use all of those lines a little bit later on, in so much that you can sort of use them to build up, say, any underlying texture that you want to maybe go for, or maybe it'll give you just some idea as a way. So for instance, if we use our image of a moon, you may wish to think, well, I've got that little sort of divot there, so I'll make that a crater, let's say, or indeed you could see where the painter's laid a little bit too much and then sort of think, oh, well, maybe I'll put a shadow there just to cover that up, or indeed just to smooth stuff over. Now, this does look very patchy at first, but as with most miniature paints, it always takes a good sort of couple of coats just to get it right. Now, you may hear a noise just for a second, as I'm just going to speed the process up by giving it a quick blast with my hairdryer. Just otherwise, it'll just be watching 45 minutes of watching paint dry, which I'm sure may be interesting to some, but for some people, it may not. So that's dried it up enough, and then hopefully the rest will be dry by the time we get there. Now, we'll just do another layer of this. Now, if you do happen to find that you do have paint that is still a little bit wet on your anything that you're painting, by all means you can continue to paint, but if you do have an area that's such as this bit here that's still a little bit glossy, that you can see when it is still wet, try to avoid painting over that directly. Now, the reason why we say for all of that is that if the paint is drying, it will dry a surface layer of it that won't be quite as strong as a fully dried layer, and if you bring your brush over the top of it again, it will pull it off, and then you'll get a texture that isn't necessarily desirable. If you're, for instance, painting verdigris, you can use this, and it does in fact give it a nice effect, but for anything that you want a nice smooth coat for, maybe best to avoid. I think that's drying nicely, so I'll just ignore my own advice there. And we'll let that dry just for a moment. Now, the other thing, while we're letting that dry, I think we may diverge from what I had planned for the previous one, which does mean I need to add some paint to my palette, and this will lead nicely into some non-metallics later, but just as a quick demo as well, we can start to think about, let's add some gold to it, why not? And just while that is drying, we did have the blade appearing onto it before, but I think let's add some framing things. So I think we'll add maybe some sort of loop just there, something that can go around there. Then we'll uppercut. To just the other direction. Then maybe another thing spilling out from there, and perhaps something to link it into there. And indeed, for all of these are just things that you can make up as you're painting. Now, you will also notice that it is quite difficult to see, especially on camera for you, so apologies if you can't. I'll just zoom in a little bit for you, so hopefully... Oh no, that'll just make it darker, so we'll zoom out again. And for these, you'll see if you've already painted the surface that you're putting it on, some of your construction lines may disappear slightly as you're painting them. If this is the case, do not worry about it. Generally, if you know that they're there, or you can get a close approximation of them, that's fine. But if indeed you do lose them, do not worry. You can always re-establish them later on. I think we'll just have something maybe connecting those, leading to, I don't know, let's put a point just there. Now, as you can see, this is much less refined than indeed the first one, and this is because I'm making it up off the top of my head, and really, as I've said, it's better to have some form of reference if you're going for anything like this, but you never know, it might turn out good in the end. And we'll just put another little sort of barbed idea just onto there. And from there, we have a generally sort of quite a basic construction there, and we can then start with some highlighting. And everyone who has painted a miniature before will know how to highlight, and indeed the slow progression of highlights up into your maximum points of light, or indeed you're starting off with your maximum points of light and going up towards the shadows. The same is very much true of freehand. And for this, with the gold effect, I'm starting with a base coat of dark golden brown from Monument Hobbies, and then I'm just adding in some regular golden brown to that, just to get it a little bit brighter for what I'll refer to in the non-metallic one as a frame for the highlights. In this case, it's just a first step that's a little bit brighter, and this just allows us a little space to control where we're going to add our brighter points, where indeed we want to go, and maybe we can see if, say, something doesn't work, we can adjust it there and there, but if it does, we can see. So I think we'll have a little bit of light just coming onto there. We'll highlight that bit just there, maybe have some light coming up into that point as well. Leave a little bit of shadow there just to add some visual interest. We'll have a point there, perhaps, I don't know, put something up to there. Then as we're coming over here, because this is on a crease, we'll want to have a highlight there just naturally, but that we can explore when we go back to the original one. Oh, my apologies, I'm tilting it so you can't see it. Now, if, much like me, you do have quite poor eyesight, you may need the use of a magnifier. I'm currently using one at the moment, which incidentally is why I don't have a face cam on. And for all of these, if you do sort of need to, or indeed if your eyesight is fine, having a magnifier can just improve your painting anyway, because you'll be able to see your individual brush strokes, all of your details in much sharper detail, and just indeed you'll just be able to see things much bigger, and miniatures are tiny, or indeed covered in teeny tiny details, such as, say, the new Cities of Sigmar range has got more detail than I think any other miniature that realistically they need to have. But we'll just extend that little bit of highlight just there, just so it again adds a little bit more room. We'll put that there. So now we've got a few sort of gold relief sections marked out. We'll just dip back to the moon just to give that another quick highlight. Now, obviously, if you're doing yours, you can spend hours and hours and hours working on it, and I do encourage you to do so, because it is a very therapeutic process once you've done all of your little details of the rest of your miniature. In this case, because I've only got 45 minutes, I am rushing a little bit. So, well, let that just dry again. And there'll probably be enough for that sort of layer onto there, because then we can start to bring in some shadows and some brighter highlights that will help to cover it up and give it a nice solid layer. But we'll return to our gold for a second, so we're just adding a little bit more of the golden brown into it. And again, we can use the tip of the brush, and we'll just build up some highlights just in the middle there. Perhaps some just in the middle there. Now you'll notice as well that generally when I'm highlighting something, I don't just place the brush into the middle of the area and then just push the brush across it. Instead, what I prefer to do, and this is just due to the anatomy of the brush, is when you place your brush onto the miniature, you have a small amount of paint deposited, but when you withdraw the brush from the miniature, you have a vaster amount of paint deposited. So, if we see just here, you'll see that there is that little bead of sort of paint just at the top there that's sharply shining. I should probably zoom in, I suppose. And if you can see there, that is where the paint is the most concentrated. Now, for the reason of this is, rather than doing one stroke, you can do half a stroke and then one from the other direction, and that way you get all of the paint built up into the middle of the brush stroke. This not only helps with keeping the concentration there, and indeed keeping the paint flowing, and indeed keeping your brush strokes there, but it'll also help with glazing later. But again, we'll get to that with non-metallics, because it's a little bit easier to see on a larger surface. And so again, we'll just build up a little bit of light just on these. And do maybe another quick layer there. And if indeed you do sort of notice something that maybe doesn't necessarily look as right, or doesn't look perhaps as good as you were expecting, just paint over it. It is only paint. Or indeed, if you find that you've sort of missed a highlight anywhere, then again, you can just paint over that too. Now again, we're going to get even brighter now by going into pure golden brown onto our golden details, and just again applying it in the same way with small brush strokes, building up using the tip of the brush, which I realised is off frame, so I'll move that up for you and do it again. And as you can see, we're just doing tiny, minute little brush strokes building them up, pushing them towards the middle of where we want our brighter points to be. And if for whatever reason I suddenly go quiet, that is either because I've forgotten what I'm going to say or I'm holding my breath, one of the two. If you're struggling to keep your, if your hands do shake a lot, as I know some people do, if that is something you can do, holding your breath does work quite well because it stops your hands shaking for whenever your heart beats. However, do remember to breathe afterwards, don't pass out when you're painting, that's unfortunate. Or indeed, if you do have quite significant hand tremors, then holding the model close to your chest can sometimes work as well, or just clamping your hands together, as I do, like this, so that you've got a nice solid base onto it. The other thing you can do as well is having a miniature holder. They are available from places like Games Workshop, or indeed you can get fancy ones from Rathcore. Personally, I just use a load of old cotton reels with some blue tack on the top, and then it doesn't matter if I spray them when I'm using the airbrush. So while the gold is just drying, we shall just do a little bit more onto the moon. So I'm taking a little bit now of the bright warm grey and just adding a little bit of black to it, just to desaturate it, so removing some of the saturation from it, making it a bit more grey. And that will be our shadow tone for this. Now and again, we can apply it fairly loosely, and I'm going to just thin it down a bit. I'll just show you on my thumb. Now you may have seen on YouTube or Twitch or anything like that, people, they normally run their brush just across their thumb, like so. That can also keep the tip of the brush going, but it also just means that you can check the dilution of it going into there, and then when we get to non-metallics, I'll show you a trick for getting the perfect consistency of glaze. It doesn't mean painting your thumbnail, so if you are somebody that paints your nails normally, you may want to wear a glove. But for this, if we have the moon, we'll say that we've got light shining from, let's say, this direction. Let's say up here, and so we have the curve just there, so I think that we'll put a bit of shadow just under here, and then some shadow naturally just there, maybe a little bit more, and then we have a natural shadow from the cape coming along just there, so we'll put some there. I think I might need to make it a little bit darker just because it's not showing up too well on the camera. And we'll just do that. And then we'll just leave that to dry again. But amongst the litter of brushstrokes that you can see among here, you can start to decide to see that the shadows and the highlights are starting to work together, but it does also follow the shape of the cape that we have already got. Ooh, my autofocus thing has come up. And with the reason why we're doing that is because if you're painting anything that is already modelled, if you just paint a flat surface onto it, it won't look as realistic as perhaps something such in this way. So the first thing that you also need to start to consider is where your natural highlights and natural shadows would fall. So for this cape, we have, for instance, this crease just there, which I'll just paint some water over so you can see it a bit clearer. Now for there, that would follow all the way down into this lip there. So of course we need a bit of shadow onto our freehand regardless, even if it would be somewhere that is highlighted or anything like that. Same with this one just here. Similarly, on the top of all of the creases, we can add a bit more we can add some highlights, which I shall do now with a bright ivory, just again from Monument Hobbies. The paints that you use do not necessarily matter. You can use whichever paints you wish. I'm just using the Monument Hobbies range because they are next to my desk at the moment. If you don't have them and you prefer Vallejo, they're fine as well. You can do it with Citadel, you can do whatever you like. It's, in the words of, I can't remember who it was, but the best paints that you have are the ones that you have at the time. So, whichever ones you want, you can start painting that, and you see we're following this curve just here, so we're adding some paint just onto the top, and pushing some just to there, maybe blend some of that out a little. And then, just because we've got a bit of a stark line just there, just feather that out too. again, with all sort of like tips and sort of tricks that you may have picked up over the previous classes, or just any that you know already, all of them just as applicable to freehand as they are to ordinary painting. So while we let that dry, we'll go back to our gold again, and now we're just going to do a mix of the ordinary golden brown with a bit of the bright ivory from before, just to get a slightly off-white with a bit of that gold brown in. And now I'm going to switch to the size 0, that's the one. Just got a little bit of paint dried on the tip, I'll just get rid of that. And the only reason why I'm doing this is just because I've got a little bit of the intricate floral detail. You could do it with a size 1 if you're brave, but because I'm doing it on camera, I decided not to. And so for this, you can see again, we've not got too much paint on the tip of the brush, so we're just having a little amount because you don't want too much paint, just in case you were to accidentally connect with it and then you have to repaint stuff, which is a pain. So again, we're building the highlights up, getting that brighter each time, moving more into that sort of more concentrated area, and indeed bringing the paint to where we want the brightest points to be. And as I've said before, following where the natural highlight would go, as well as any stylized highlights that we want to add. Now, as the paint gets brighter, certain pigments do tend to separate a bit more, so you may need to do more layers, which may seem terrifying if you've already painted one layer with the freehand as it is, in which case all you have to do is, if you've already done something once, you can easily replicate it. So just paint over the same areas, just have a little bit of a lighter touch if you need to, and no doubt you'll be able to get there. And indeed, if it doesn't necessarily go as well, just go back to your previous colours that you've done and just paint over the top of it. Now, on my camera, that's starting to look alright. Some of the sort of differences between the lights and the shadows are perhaps a little bit stark. That is just because of the camera, and I apologise for that. There, when I post the pictures into the server, hopefully they'll be a little bit clearer. But we'll just go now into using pure bright ivory just onto these brighter sections of gold. So these are really nice sort of shiny bits, and for this we'll put some just there, because of course if we're following the trace of our light coming from that direction, then we can put another one just there, again following the shape of the cape. One coming into there, a little bit there, a little dash there, and then perhaps some there. And we'll do an edge highlight, why not? And from there you can get quite a nice convincing gold. But I can hear you all clamouring, let's go back to the moon because it's a bit more interesting. So, we had a sword on the previous one, so we'll have another sword for that. Now, I'll go over what the colours that I am doing are for non-metallics, because this is all going to be using the same palette, just to show that you don't have to have all of these very specific colours for it. In fact, we'll switch back to a size 1, why not? But we shall start off with this, and I'll zoom out again, just so that I keep more stuff in frame. And I think we'll have some lines like that, going into there, putting that into there, and then we had it bisecting the bottom before, so we shall do it the opposite way this time. And other thing that you have to do is not get too attached to what you've painted in certain sections, because you will be painting over them if indeed you have a complex design, which may just feel like sacrilege to some people, but at the same time, if you have that attached to it, if you've painted it once, you can absolutely paint it again. So it's perhaps a little bit thick just there, so I'll extend that bit, slightly off camera there, and then think, let's maybe put the blade at the top this time, why not? So put a little bit of point just there, perhaps shape the details just at the top with the tip of the brush, just to have a little bit more visual interest. And then just again make a few slight adjustments towards the bottom, just to show all of those, and we'll put a little bit of an indication of something coming from underneath the moon, just there. Again, just to frame it. Now I shall once again just make a noise for a second while I just let that dry, otherwise again we will be here for longer than the length of the course, but now again, this is just something that again you can doodle around on the back of your miniatures. If you have a plan, it will be a lot easier, but if you're making up a bit up onto the spot, that's never a bad thing too, and you can experiment as you wish. So now we have got a frame again for where we want to take it. We can start to highlight it. So for this, just adding in a colour just to get it a little bit brighter. And again, working with a nice blue. So for this sort of blade, I think we'll have light hitting from this direction. Getting it nice and sharp there, using the tip of the brush. If indeed you do find that you do sort of go over the top, or perhaps elements aren't as sharp as you perhaps wanted them to, I'll just block in this bit, and then I should just have enough time to show you what happens if you make any mistakes. And then we'll put a line just along there, just to have another bit. Then, since it's a blade, we can put a middle line, and then an edge highlight onto the other side, and we'll put another little edge highlight just there to show that the light is bouncing off it. And we'll keep the middle line going up there. Now again, we've got to sort of establish where we want our brighter points to be in establishing our frame, and people have sort of called this like the checkerboard effect of doing non-metallics, which will lead me neatly into my next class in about 20-ish minutes time, but we'll just have a quick preview for you. We'll be going into more detail there, but just to show you, if we have I think we'll have some light just there, make it a little bit longer just for some visual interest. Then we want some shadow up onto this side of things, so I think we'll extend some more light up to there, again making sure that they aren't just about in line, but there is this sort of nice cross section of shadow there, again keeping the shadow for there. And then we'll have some light onto this side and shadow at the top. And once we've got that, it's starting to look perhaps a little bit more metallic, you might think, and so we can add a little bit of brighter paint into that original mix. That again, I should go over. And we're back on screen. And again, still using a size 1 with not much paint into the tip. We can then add another highlight. Again, we're using slightly thinner paint just to help build this up, because if we have a couple more layers, we can use that those multiple layers again to blend it as we're painting it, but also just so that if we do make any mistakes, we can very quickly clean our brush and rub it out. Oops. And that will be a little mistake there that I'll show you how to correct in a moment. And as you can see again, just to demonstrate the idea of if we want our highlight point to be, let's say, in the middle, just here, we draw our brush from the top towards it, and then from the other direction, depositing more paint into the middle. And indeed, because we're using thinner paint, we don't have as much paint at the bottom as we do into the middle, so it naturally blends it towards it. Now again, this is looking a little bit shinier just because it is on camera and my lights are picking it up, but you'll be able to see the effect when you're painting, I'm sure. And then we'll just do another layer quickly. And so once we've got those sort of areas blocked in, we can again, as you're probably sick of me saying by now, go even brighter, nearly up to the pure form of that brush, and we'll switch to the size 0 again, just for ease of painting onto camera, but again you could do this with a size 1 if you wanted. And again, we're painting over the same areas again, getting a nice bright edge highlight, perhaps a little bit of light just there, going into there, having that same area of light hitting to there. Slightly off camera again, my apologies, and then drawing the brush down onto that middle line, direction, another edge highlight, and again drawing our brush towards the middle, and from the other direction, another edge highlight, just there. And it's starting to be built up. It's not particularly neat, and obviously you could go over and correct some bits if, say for instance, the shadows aren't as detailed as they could be, or indeed an edge highlight is a bit too thick. We can just paint over that with some of our shadow tone to reinforce it. Perhaps add a little bit more up there. And then that can be brought across, and then we're going to go for some even brighter highlights. You can see I've got a little bit of time left, so we'll just cover a little bit more, and we'll just do some nice bright points with the tip of the brush, again holding it in a slightly different way, just draw upwards. And again, from down there we go, and then we'll just have a bright point just there, have a little bit more brightness onto the moon with a nice glaze, just to finish that off. And then we have a slight metallic effect that again isn't particularly neat, but then again going a little bit quickly just through this. But let's say that you have I can show you. So let's say if we go for when I'm painting, if we go for something that actually is slightly too thin. So for a lot of the paints that I want to build up, if I'm doing a sort of a base coat with it, I will do maybe sort of 1 part paint to 1 part water. If I want to go for something that is, say, perhaps a glaze to be built up, or indeed something that is just another layer over the top, or indeed I want to build it up slowly, I'll generally go for something where if you paint it onto your hand, we'll use my thumb as a model for this one, if you can paint it onto your hand, you'll want something where as you draw the brush across, it does have you can still see through quite clearly the pigmentation of my skin through it, but then there are droplets of paint being built up. This is kind of like a sort of more towards a heavy glaze or a light layer consistency, depending on how you want to refer to it, but it comes off the brush nice and easily, as we can see. We can build it up, and indeed we have still enough control over it that we can paint really whatever we would like to without it going out of control, as I just paint all over my thumb just to demonstrate this, I suppose. So that's the kind of thing that we want, but the other thing is it's not so thick that you can't just wipe it off with another finger. And in the event that you do make a mistake onto your work, the important thing is that whatever colour that you have based your sort of backdrop off, in this case this cape, so we have a nice purple that is a sunset purple from scale 75. The important thing is if you have some of that onto your palette, if we hold the model just slightly like there, what you can do is with a thin sort of almost like a glaze consistency is just easily glaze over the top. And we want to keep the paint thin in this case, because otherwise when you are painting over it, the thicker paint will dry a little bit glossier than a thinner one. And so when you're looking at it in natural light, the light will hit that thicker part of the paint, and so it'll look even more unnatural than it would before. Not so much as a mistake, but just because it will collect more light. And indeed, we can do that with really anything. I'll just dab a little there too. And I think that brings me up to the 15 minutes where we have a break, unless there are any more questions that people may have, and then after we just have a quick break, we'll be going over some more non-metallics on a more 3D surface, examining that, light reflections, all of that fun stuff just in a little bit more detail. Well, if there are any, or people wish to if there are any and people wish to ask them afterwards, feel free to leave them in the server, or they can... Anything that you think is fun, really. I'd say you can do some sort of like simple sort of fleur-de-lis designs in simple colour. You could do anything that's from, sort of, if you're painting Warhammer, look into the codices or battle tomes for that particular army and see if there's maybe a repeating design just to get started with. But really anything that you think you will enjoy painting, because ultimately at the end of the day we're here to enjoy ourselves, not necessarily to have something that's completely perfect. Any others? There is I realise just, if I'm going quiet for a bit, there is a slight delay between me getting questions. But yeah, if any of them do, sort of, anybody has any questions that do come up, do drop me a message on Discord, or if you do think of anything during the break, I will try to answer them during the non-metallic sessions after this. But we shall be back in, say, about 10 minutes. Go do what you need to do, and then we'll return for physics, art history, and me painting some more metals for you all. Enjoy! I'll be back in a minute.